My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. The biggest question most of us ask in our lifetime is not about our lifetime, but what happens after this body of ours, this magnificent carbon-based home of our essence, ceases to exist. What happens when we die? There have been many reports from peoples of all backgrounds, cultures, levels of education, and faith or no faith of what has been called the NDE, or near-death experience. What happens during the NDE, and is this a true reflection of what happens when we finally die? Our guest this evening, Roy L. Hill, has addressed this question and much more in his groundbreaking book, Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. Roy obtained his doctorate in clinical psychology and has worked as a psychologist in corrections, both as a clinician and supervisor, for more than 20 years. Following several life-changing experiences, Roy delved into the topic of near-death experiences. As his mission and passion, Roy is currently writing more books on near-death experience subjects. When not writing, he enjoys hiking, photography, and tinkering on the piano. He lives in Colorado with his wife and son. His website is www.neardeathexppsy.com. Please join me in welcoming Roy L. Hill. Good evening, Roy.
Thank you. Good evening, Victor. Glad to be here.
And thank you so much for joining us this evening. So let's start off with this question. What was your early take on the NDE, and when did you first become familiar with the phenomenon?
Well, I first became familiar with the phenomenon in college. I read Raymond Moody's famous book, and it just had an interest to me, but I put it aside. I was raised primarily in a very scientific household. My father and brother both are physicists. My mother's geologist, and I was a black sheep in the family as a social scientist. But really, I didn't become immersed in near-death experiences until just a few years ago. And there's a story about that goes back really about 16 years ago. It'd take a minute to describe.
Please do.
I was working at a federal prison, and I had an inmate whose sister had passed away in an automobile accident. And this inmate became very depressed, and I had to place him on suicide watch there at the institution. No real change for the first couple of days, but the third day, he was better. And as a psychologist, my question is why and why now? So I asked him why he was better, and indeed he looked better. His mental status looked good, meaning he was eating well, he looked animated, less depressed, denying suicidal ideation, and so forth. He said, well, my deceased sister is talking to me. I thought, oh boy, psychosis, right? And I said, well, what is she telling you? She's saying that I shouldn't be here on suicide watch, that she's in a better place, and that she was allowed to help me for a little bit to get back on my feet, to get off suicide watch and make my life more meaningful. And I thought about it. I thought, this does not sound like a psychotic reaction, because auditory hallucinations from psychosis are always cryptic, negative, and never helpful. So since his mental status looked good, I let him off watch, observed on the unit, however, and I saw him the next morning. And I asked him, is your deceased sister still talking to you? And he said, yes. He says, what is she saying to you? And be careful sometimes what you ask for. He said, well, she's telling me you don't believe me. And so you shall believe she has a message for you. And I was getting goosebumps on this. I come from a Baptist background, so this wasn't part of my normal repertoire with dealing with spiritual matters. I said, well, what does that mean? He goes, well, I don't know. He says, well, is it like a quarter of the coin, a quarter of something full? He said, well, she's saying quarter of the coin, but she's not saying anything more about it. So he leaves, and another inmate comes, and this guy is a white Muslim, a breed unto itself, and he's ranting about the hypocrisy of the United States. And I was half listening to him, and he said to me, Dr. Hill, do you know what's written on a quarter? And I said, in God we trust. He goes, that's right. I thought, wow. Yeah, nobody's asked that of me before or since. So this is too much of a synchronicity.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked to the original guy again, and I said, did your deceased sister say anything else to you? And he said, yeah. He says that your wife is pregnant. You're going to have a son, and he'll be born on Christmas Day. And I thought, wow, that's rather specific. But I knew the first two items were correct. My wife was pregnant, and I knew it was a son. Very few people knew that. No inmates knew that I knew of. But maybe he overheard something. Staff not supposed to say anything about like that, but maybe he picked it up. Well, my son was born on January 7th. And if you go forward 11 years, I was working in another institution, another state, and it bothered me. Why did this first part seem so real and the second part didn't work out? Then I had an epiphany. First, there was a declaration that I didn't have faith. And then there was a statement that I needed to trust in God. So I thought maybe this was a test of faith. So in a leap of faith, I Googled Christmas Day, January 7th, knowing as everybody else does that Christmas Day is December 25th. Lo and behold, a lot of stuff came up. Turns out we use the Roman calendar, the Julian calendar, but there's a Christian calendar called the Gregorian calendar that Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, 500 million Christians still use, but Christendom used to use pretty much the Christian calendar. And according to the Christian calendar, Christmas Day is January 7th.
Messages coming to you, huh?
Absolutely. So what do I do with that? So, my Christian friends would say, oh, Doc, be careful where that's coming from. It's from the devil. Well, I don't believe that the devil tells me that I need to trust in God. So I knew about near-death experiences, Raymond Moody's book. I also knew about the NDERF website, which is the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. At the time, there was 3,000 anonymous accounts, and I pretty much read them all. And it was like this jigsaw puzzle. All the pieces just fit in together perfectly. And I thought, wow, I understand spirituality at a whole different level. So I started corresponding with Jody Long and the Longs who were in charge of the website and are steeped in the near-death experience movement. And they encouraged me to write a book and was very instrumental. And after I started writing a book, I started receiving more experiences myself.
Right.
So that's kind of an introduction to how I got into this work.
Now, for those new to the concept, even though I think that most people have some kind of an idea about the NDE, please explain what the near-death experience is.
Very basically, it's going home, either when we die or in some people's cases, like Eben Alexander, in a deep coma. So basically, this is the tough place here on what I call school earth. So when we go home, we go to a spiritual realm that's made of basically energy. The fabric of this spiritual realm is interconnected, and everything in it is expressions of God, and the fabric of God is love. So when people go on the other side, some people see spiritual beings, some people see Jesus, some people see God, some people just are in a void. Some very simple ones have just an out-of-body experience. If somebody isn't passed away but a few seconds, they may just go out of the body and come back. So the deeper ones meaning when people are usually deceased for longer periods of time, they go to another realm. Sometimes they go through a tunnel, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they meet deceased loved ones, sometimes they don't. But there is some underlying elements to near-death experiences are the same, regardless of age, race, culture, religion, which is really amazing.
Absolutely. And do you have some examples as to how these things occur? In other words, you mentioned Dr. Eben Alexander, who was in a coma, basically, and was considered to be brain dead and came back, obviously. What are some of the other ways that people experience this?
Well, I think the primary two ways that people actually go to the spiritual realm are through death and coma. However, there are many people and a growing number of people who have different connections to the other side as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to limit such spiritual experiences to near-death experiences, but near-death experiences are a little different in that the body actually dies, mm-hmm. and the spirit is released from the body. So it's more than an out-of-body experience or an after-death communication or some of these other things that other people are reporting. It's not that one is not important. They're all important.
And we're talking with Dr. Roy L. Hill, author of the groundbreaking book, Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. And we'll be back with more with Roy after these messages on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this evening, Roy L. Hill, author of the book, Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. So, Roy, before the break, we were talking about how people experience the near-death experience. Now, does this only happen for spiritually minded people, or can it happen for anyone, and perhaps they become more spiritual as a result of the experience?
Absolutely. It can happen to anybody. Even agnostics and atheists may have near-death experiences. Now, not everybody who dies for a short period of time remembers their near-death experience, but anybody can have them from all walks of life, cultures, religions, and so forth. You ask if people are transformed. They're incredibly transformed, because on the other side, they realize a greater reality. They realize the real. And many of them say what's on the other side is realer than real. And it's more than just what they perceive. It is the basis of creation itself, is infused with purpose. It's infused with God. They realize that they're in this powerful, magnificent spiritual being having a human experience. They also realize that this earth is very important, even though they're limited. They realize it is important because we're here to learn things. Let me add to that. I would ask your listeners, have you ever wondered what the meaning of life is? I would bet many of your listeners would say, yes.
Absolutely, and sometimes every day and sometimes multiple times during the day.
Absolutely. And people who have near-death experiences are coming back with an answer. So here's the big key to existence.
Mm-hmm.
We are here to learn what we lack in love.
Mm.
It's as simple as that. Because before we were human, people with near-death experiences say we were spiritual beings.
Absolutely.
And as spiritual beings, why would we want to come to this limited existence where there's pain and death and ignorance? Well, there's a very important point to it. When we're up there in the spiritual realm, we're interconnected with love, we're interconnected with God, there's no sickness, no death, no conflict, a great place to feel bliss, but not a great place to become individuals, to decide who we want to become by our free will. So God gifts us with this existence to decide, to choose who we want to become, to develop ourselves independent from a direct, continuous connection with God. And so Earth is a school Earth. And we're here to learn what we lack in love. And most people have 1, 2, 3 missions at most. And we come down here to try to fulfill that mission so that we may grow as spiritual beings, to have more light within us.
So the next question is, who orchestrates the NDE? Are there people who are chosen for this experience by the divine? Does God reach out a hand and pull them toward heaven? Or does an NDE involve a human mistakenly dying and coming back with the help of the angels, the guides, or even unassisted? Or is it something like the Adjustment Bureau, that romantic comedy that came out a few years ago?
That's a tough question. And to be honest with you, to be frank, I don't know if I can answer it completely. I have read a few NDEs where people have died suddenly, and the spiritual beings on the other side said it was a mistake, and then they have to go back. Many more than those few say that they died to have this near-death experience, and they're to return back to Earth to share their experience, to finish their work. In almost every case, it's said that people who have to come back, or given a choice to come back, it says you have more work to do.
Absolutely.
And this speaks again to the idea of mission, that our Earth, although limited, is very important.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, let's get the what the old expression is, the 600-pound gorilla in the room. Let's get this question out of the way and then move forward with the spiritual aspects of this. A lot of skeptics, in particular neuroscientists, will say that what people report as the NDE is our brain firing off all these neurons and generating this vision that it's not something spiritual or real, but it's the body's chemistry in a last flurry trying to give something to the person. How do you answer the skeptics and the critics?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that question, because I think it's a very important question. I recently wrote a science magazine. There was a science magazine that had an article in there where this guy had a near-death experience, his father, and he was incredibly transformed. And the author of this article said, it was my father. He was more loving. His life changed. He says, too bad that science says it was just all in his brain. So I wrote to the editors saying, the father probably would not believe in the science, and nor should he, because the science really isn't there. For instance, people will say, okay, in a rat's brain or a mouse brain, we can observe a neurological cells working, brain cells working after the mouse has died. Well, how well does a mouse generalize to human? And indeed, human beings also have neurological activity after they die for just mere seconds, but it becomes very rapidly disorganized. It cannot explain the very deep, complex meaningful, lengthy experiences that people are having during a near-death experience. Some say it's a hallucination, and they cite ketamine studies. Well, ketamine does produce crude near-death experience type states, but most of the states it does not reproduce. So I think it's a very poor analogy. Others will say it's an evolutionary adaptive phenomenon. And I ask, what is the evolutionary advantage of somebody having a pleasant experience when they die? How does that help the individual or the species in a dead brain? It doesn't. So here is the crux of my answer. People confuse science with scientism. Science uses the scientific method, where a variable is tested by controlling other variables, and then it's reproduced. And I believe in science. I'm a scientist. When I go up into an airplane 30,000 feet in the air, I trust that science. Otherwise, I wouldn't get in a tin can up 30,000 feet in the air.
And a prayer doesn't hurt.
Right. However, what scientism is basically an emotional reaction to non-materialism by explaining things through weak theories that do not have strong evidence. And I think that's true with people who are saying near-death experiences are in the brain. I've yet to see a cogent argument that is tested and reproduced saying that near-death experiences are in the brain.
Absolutely. I mean, for those who've read Dr. Eben Alexander's book, I'm not going to give away the context of it, but he came back with information that he could not have possibly had in his prior to the NDE, and it was provable and identifiable and actually reinforced and confirmed for him. And he's a neurosurgeon, scientist. He actually brought back something that gave him positive evidence that he had that near-death experience. And for those of you who haven't read his book, please do so, because I think it's a great example of what we're talking about.
And plus, he, Anita Moorjani, and so many others should be dead.
Yep.
The fact that they're back and living in a functioning brain and body.
Right.
There's no explanation how these people could have came back and survived and thrived. That defies a materialistic scientific explanation in itself.
Absolutely. He was brain dead for how long? It was a period of days or hours? I don't remember exactly.
They gave him no chance.
Right.
They gave him a very minute chance of coming back, and they said if he did come back, he would be brain dead.
Exactly. They told his wife basically prepare to pull the plug, basically. And
yes.
Amazing story and a wonderful story for those who haven't read it. Go out and get that book. So, for a few of the people who have that NDE experience, the invisible is made visible. What did they see?
Well, they see what is manifest for them. If you want to know what heaven looks like, it is manifest based on what we need to see on the other side. Can I give a couple examples?
Please.
There was a Native American NDE. When he died, what was manifest for him out of the energy was a school bus. And he went in the school bus, and there was some deceased elders having a peyote ceremony. But when he touched that school bus, he felt a greater reality. He understood a greater reality that was interconnected and was filled with love and intelligence. Move it to another person who was a devout Catholic, but a type of Catholic who believed if you didn't believe exactly the way he did, you were going to hell. So when he died, what was manifest for him? A big Catholic cathedral. So instead of a bus, a Catholic cathedral. He beelined it into the cathedral, went to confession like he was supposed to. He sat down, an arm came out. He touched it. It was Jesus. And then when he touched Jesus, he understood that there was nothing to confess. He felt the interconnection, the love, and the intelligence, the exact same thing that the native felt in the school bus. But but was manifest for him was different because that's what he needed to see. And so Jesus told him, knowing about his beliefs that other people are going to hell, he said, go back, belong your light to yourself or others. So what is seen up there isn't really seen through eyes. We're all energy.
Mm-hmm.
We manifest things, and what we see is a 360 view. And how do we see it if we don't have eyes? How do we hear if we don't have ears? Remember, everything is interconnected. So you see things, quote unquote, by knowing it, to becoming it.
Absolutely. My guest, Roy L. Hill, author of the book Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. Roy, please tell our listeners how they can get your book and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
Well, thank you, Victor. My book is called Psychology and Near-Death Experience, and don't let the title intimidate anybody. There is a little psychology in there, but it's helps the reader understand spiritual matters to give it context. And that way, my book is unique. It is written for people who are looking at deep spirituality to go beneath the surface. You can get my book off Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Kindle, Apple iTunes, or check out my website.
And let's give your website one more time, please.
It's Near Death, EXP as an experience, PSY as in psychology.com. So that's Near Death, EXP, PSY.com.
And we'll be back with more of Roy Hill and his book, Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes Radio Network after these messages.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Hi, this is Carly Simon for Lifebeat. The music industry fights AIDS. The AIDS crisis isn't over. There have been amazing scientific breakthroughs, but people are still dying, and your local AIDS organization needs your help more now than ever. Volunteer and make a difference.
And welcome back to Destination Unlimited. My guest this evening, Roy L. Hill, author of the book Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. So we were talking before the break, Roy, about what people who have the NDE see, the invisible made visible, and you talked about how for each person, depending upon their faith base or their culture, they would see what they needed to see to learn and to grow. Now, what do people say about God or the divine after an NDE? We all have many concepts that we use for God. Do people actually see God in the form that they believe God to exist in, or do they find constructs that we use here on earth?
That's a good question, Victor. For the most part, God is seen as a light. Gold light, sometimes white. But people, even who don't see God, actually sense God within everything. In fact, some people say there really is no division between souls. For instance, when Jesus said in the Bible, I am the Father, Father is me, well, are we not all sons and daughters of the Father?
Absolutely.
And so we're all expressions of this God consciousness. And so if that's so, let me ask you this, where is God not?
Mm-hmm.
So really we're all looking at God right now by the reality that we're observing at this very moment. But for people who have near-death experiences, some communicate with God. And God, and this is a real irony, this is difficult for me to wrap my head around, and it involves the unity, interconnection of everything. How can God be a collective and an individual at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the answer to that because my brain can't comprehend things like infinity.
Right.
So, but many times God is experienced as a light. Sometimes God talks to the person who has an NDE. And sometimes God presents even as a man, if that's what the NDEer needs. I can give you an example of that if you like.
Please.
So this one woman, she found herself in a garden, which is very frequently seen by people who have near-death experiences. So in this garden, the colors were more vivid than she'd ever seen. She could see 360, and everything was brimming with energy. So she goes to a stream side, which is usually there in the garden with a bridge. Now, there's a barrier typically that people cannot cross when they have near-death experiences. And for her case, that stream and the bridge represented that barrier. But who was there by the stream bank, sitting on a log, but a nice gentleman who she knew to be God? So God asked her, what if it was me and you and nobody else? And she goes, I don't know what you mean. God repeats, what if it was me and you and nobody else? She said, well, I would probably irritate you after a while because I tend to ramble on and on. But I don't think God laughed at that. God just repeated it. What if it was me and you and nobody else? Now look at this tree. So she looks at this tree. And because she's looking at it by knowing it, she sees it at the molecular level, to seeing the whole tree, to seeing God infused in the tree. And she said, I see you, God.
Mm.
And God says, that's right. Now, what do you see when you see your parents? She says, I see you, God. Yes. What do you see when you see your ex-husband? She reluctantly says, I see you, God. And then God says, now, when you look in the mirror, who do you see?
Mm.
And she wanted to say nobody special, but she knew better. And she said, I see you, God.
Yeah.
And God said, yes. And the lesson of that is that we're all important, so important. We're of God. We're so important that it could be you and God and nobody else. And that's how much God loves you. So even though God is infinite, God is also very personal for each and one. So it's a mistake to say an infinite God, how could God be concerned about me? But God is so concerned about every single listener that it could be just you and God and nobody else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We had talked a little bit about people coming back from these experiences and being profoundly changed. Is there a psychological profile for someone who's had an NDE?
Well, I don't know if anybody has developed a psychological profile of these folks, but I can give you a few commonalities. People think, oh, what a wonderful thing to have a near-death experience. I wish I could go and experience that love. Now imagine going up there, though, and feeling peace and love to the point that you've never experienced it before. One person said, I felt love to the extent it felt like being in a swimming pool where every molecule of my being was infused with love.
Mm.
Another person said there was so much love that if you added all the love I experienced in a lifetime, it wouldn't have amounted to the love I felt up there in a single moment.
Wow.
So if you can imagine that love, when people are said they need to go back and finish their work, what do you think they say? They say, I don't want to go.
There you go.
And isn't it ironic that people fear death so much and they fight and scream, and when they actually get there, they don't want to return.
Yeah.
But beyond that irony, when they do come back, many of these folks who have NDEs struggle.
Mm.
They're changed people. The things that mattered of the world, the egotistical pursuits of these little monuments of power and fame and things that they don't matter. And they understand that. And they see the cruelty and the divisiveness in our world, and they want to shy away from it. They want to go back. It's tough for them. In fact, the divorce rate, I believe, is about 70%. Because their spouses and families don't understand them anymore.
Yep.
And they have difficult relating to their spouses many times. So it's tough. And the ones that do succeed are the ones who realize that they have an important mission here on earth, that their life's important, and it's to learn how to love, to learn what we lack in love, which is the meaning of life again. And so they try to fulfill their mission in service of others. So those who have, let's say, a wealthy position in a company may quit and become a clergyman or a nurse or a doctor or a mental health professional or whoever, or be involved in charities.
Absolutely.
So their lives are transformed in that way.
Now, as a psychologist, for those who are struggling after the NDE experience, do you offer any special programs or counseling for this?
Not at this time. I just recently retired from 20 years of government service, and I'm now, of course, promoting my work and doing a lot of speaking. But at some point, I really would like to work with individuals who are struggling in this matter. One piece of advice I could give is that there are many NDE groups out there, and they're growing in number. It's affiliated with the IANS, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And there are local groups meeting in many cities. And so if your listener needs support, maybe a listener who had an NDE, I would recommend to see if there's a group in their area for support.
Absolutely. Now, in your book, you make frequent reference to the ambassadors to heaven. Who are the ambassadors to heaven?
Good question. I'm, of course, referring to people who have NDEs. Not that other people can't be ambassadors as well, but they actually went over there. And in today's society, NDEs are becoming popular. But if you look at the Hollywood movies, what are they saying? They're saying, okay, this person is having this wonderful NDE experience, and they no longer fear death, and they're connecting with deceased loved ones, and they feel love, and it's a really great, hopeful story for people. And that's wonderful. I applaud that. But there's another angle to the NDE that's not in the Hollywood movies, and that is they're coming back with sobering messages from the other side. For me, there is no question in my mind why there's so many near-death experiences now where there was relatively few in the past. I mean, certainly medical technology has increased the number as well as acceptance. People feel more comfortable coming forward. But that doesn't explain how it comes from maybe a few dozen to, well, the most recent estimates is 3 to 7% based on surveys. So that's 15 million people in the United States alone.
Wow.
And there's tens of thousands of documented cases that are written down. So why? Because they're ambassadors of heaven. What people are coming back with is that the other side is very concerned about the direction we're going on Earth. And it's coming to the point where if we continue our path, we're not going to be able to turn around. There needs to be a spiritual awakening on Earth based on love, a revolution based on love instead of violence. And if we don't change, it's going to be really tough for us.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I call them our ambassadors from heaven, to be one part of a revolution to bring us to a greater spiritual awareness.
Now, you share in your book that the near-death experience serves as a model or an idealized example of how to reduce isolation on Earth. Please elaborate.
Well, when I talked about mission earlier, we have a mission to learn what we lack in love. And that means being really engaged with other people, whether it be in service or even just going to a friend's dinner, be involved in a community event, whatever it is. All that we do really needs to be focused on love. Recent research says that the average person spends 3 hours a day watching television, another hour and a half a day on the internet. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and time doing errands, there's no time left to fulfill our mission because we're living in a virtual world.
Absolutely.
And I believe that a lot of the problems that we're seeing, the anxiety people are feeling, have to do with isolation and loneliness and disconnection. And the earth and this relentless pursuit of ego and fame as the answer for happiness. And people aren't finding happiness. And people are trying to sink themselves into a virtual world as escapism, but they're not going to find happiness either.
We're going to follow up on more on that with our guest, Roy L. Hill, author of the book Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God, after these messages on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Hello! Join us, Lisa Berry and Michelle Carter, every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the Mindset Makeover, What's Possible. Get ready to become present, clear, and unstuck, and start living fully, led by your heart. While you listen and feel this transformation through vibration of word, sound, and song, you'll open up to what's possible and experience your shift.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest tonight, Roy L. Hill, author of the book Psychology and the Near-Death Experience, Searching for God. Roy, before the break, we were talking about the isolation of people and how people are investing more time in digital technology, the internet, watching television, doing things that avoid real human contact and pursuing those things that they can do to show love and compassion to other human beings. What's the cure for that?
Well, I believe the cure is unity for the folks who are trying to make a big change. There is good news that is in stark contrast to the bad news that I gave. That NDers are saying that things are going to get pretty bad if we don't change. But the good news is there is an underlying spiritual awareness and awakening happening in the world, a new revolution, if you will. It involves not only people with near-death experiences, but anybody who is feeling anxious about the world we live in and knows that we need a spiritual change, a spiritual awakening, to be more other-centered. And we have to unite and get the message out. We have to be persistent. And with persistence and with a large group of people with one voice saying, look, we got to elevate it higher, perhaps other people will listen. Will everybody listen? I have no doubt that a lot of people will not listen.
Yeah.
But will it be enough to bring us back from the razor's edge? I wish I had the answer. I don't know. But I feel convicted to do my part and try. And so when I pass away and when I go meet God, God says, what did you do to your life? Did you fulfill your mission? I won't say, well, I watched a lot of television. No, I can say, I tried to make a better world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Whether that happens or not, I don't know.
Absolutely. I grew up in a generation in the 60s and 70s where we were idealists and we saw love and compassion as the way of changing our world and being vocal about it and sometimes obnoxious about it, but mostly not. And it seemed that we were on the right path, and then all of a sudden there was a detour somewhere in the 80s and 90s. Any idea in your mind or in the communications that you've had with folks as to why this happened?
Absolutely. Ego, greed. The 80s were the boom times, and then we had all this internet technology come out too. So there's more opportunities for escapism, opportunities for money. Even people of the baby boom generation, even those people had been enticed by the corporate world by following the almighty dollar, and then their kids were latchkey kids without any clear instruction and guidance. The foundation of the church eroded as well, and so people are aimless now. And even though that is a sobering thought, it's also a door for opportunity, that the world is screaming for a new way. I don't think near-death experiences and the message behind it would have been accepted 30 years ago.
Yep.
But people are warming up to it now because people are interested in the message.
Now, you talk about shifting one's life balance from the external to the internal. How does that change our perspective or change the way we respond and react to the world around us?
In every religion, there's an element of not being attached to the world. Obviously, Hinduism, Buddhism, that message is clear. There's elements of Christianity, too, that has been suppressed. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, was rejected by the early church, but there's many messages in there that are important for today's age. And one message, Jesus reportedly said, be passerby. And what that means is that we need to be in the world, but not attached to all the things in the world. So like we're a visitor. And when we're a visitor and not attached, then we can focus on the spiritual things that matter, on love, and not be wrapped up with all the distractions that don't matter in the world. And so, I see people in today's world, and I like sports, but, people, for instance, become attached to their team winning and pay athletes hundreds of millions of dollars to put a ball through a hoop. And I'm thinking, why? Why are people attached to things that don't matter? And I think really what we need to do is to look inward at what's important, at the divine within, to look at the love, and then express it outwards towards others, to become more unified with each other. And I don't mean to sound like I'm coming from a very Eastern point of view, but I think it's the truth. We need to be other-centered. And if we do that, what we will feel is repose, which is a dignified peace within, even in the face of adversity, because we know even things that are not well now will be well.
Absolutely. Many of us think of the soul as something that leaves the body upon death, but our souls play a hugely important role in life. How do you suggest that people tap into that part of themselves if they don't have the NDE experience just in the course of everyday life?
Good question. There has been no explanation for consciousness, at least from the physical world. People assume that consciousness is a byproduct of the brain. But really, our body is like a television set. When you see actors on a television set, they're not in your television set. They're being broadcast from somewhere else. The television set is just a medium for it to be expressed in that environment of your living room. The body is the same way. The body is only a medium for your soul to express itself in this earthly realm. And how do you know what your soul is? It's your consciousness. Even Carl Jung recognized that a long time ago. And when there's different elements of psychology focus on mindfulness, such as Marshall Linehan in the DBT movement, Marshall Linehan says we need to get in touch with our wise mind through mindfulness. And what is mindfulness? It's focusing on consciousness. And consciousness is our soul. And of course it's wise. So if we can look more within and get in touch with our consciousness and what is real there and who we are, then we'll be less externally focused to just go with the wind, whatever people say to do. And that way we can find peace. And when I say a wise consciousness, or when Marshall Linehan says a wise consciousness, there is a wisdom there beyond the brain, in my belief. Evan Alexander, let's return to him, he says that there are insights that we have that do not come from the brain. They come from our consciousness, but we don't recognize it as such.
Yeah. One of the things that I've experienced, especially in the last 20 years or so, when my path turned to a more spiritual path, was that I used to freely say whatever I felt in response to someone saying something. And one of the things that I have learned, perhaps from consciousness, is that listen first and then speak later. The old expression, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen twice, speak once. And it was a hard lesson learned, but it's such a valuable lesson. Are those some of the things that people bring back from NDEs?
Absolutely. This is why we're here on Earth, to learn things like you learned. And when I say we're here to learn how to love, I'm not talking about love as a feeling. You learned an aspect of love. You learned discernment. Mm-hmm. You learned a type of discernment that expresses caring towards others, because you don't want to hurt other people's feelings. So let's talk about love for a minute. Love can be forgiveness. It's one thing to forgive somebody who made a slight or a insensitive comment to you. It's another thing when somebody stabbed you in the back, when a spouse leaves you, or something like that. Forgiving somebody there is a real lesson in love.
Absolutely.
And take another example of sacrifice. It's one thing to help your buddy move his furniture to another room. It's a different thing to quit your job to take care of an elderly parent who is dying of Alzheimer's and watching their mental faculties dissolve until they die for several years. Absolutely. That is sacrifice, and that is love. Those are the difficult lessons we need to learn in love, and that's why we're here.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because both my wife and myself are caring for moms who are elderly and have various degrees of disability and require much more of our time than ever before. Yes. And how do you address that with people who are going through that type of experience? Obviously, it's a form of unconditional love, because let's face it, in dealing with some situations like faulty memory and inability to take medications on their own and so on and so forth, you can become frustrated, you can feel anger and guilt at the same time in Absolutely. Dealing with parents. You know, I wrote a poem when the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes when the parent becomes the child and the child becomes the parent. And how do you address that with people?
Well, first of all, we are only human. When people have near-death experiences and feel guilty, in one instance, one person felt guilty in front of Jesus, and Jesus said to her, "It's okay. You're just human. You have drives. You have a physical body, and God loves through. God shines through your cracks."
I love that. I love that. That's great. That's great.
We don't have to be perfect. We're not meant to be perfect. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need to come down to school Earth to learn.
Absolutely.
So I would say give yourself a break. It's part of the learning experience. And all that is not well will be well. Your elderly parents, the mothers, will pass on, and they'll return back home, and there will be magnificent spiritual beings, and they will love you and miss you until you join them. But they're learning valuable things in this helpless state, as you're learning valuable things as a caretaker. And on both sides, the lessons are so important. Now, think about in your life, or the listeners' lives. When have you learned most? By pleasant experiences or adversity?
I think you've answered your own question. My fabulous guest, Roy L. Hill, author of the book, Psychology and the Near-Death Experience. Roy, obviously, we don't have enough time in this one show to talk about all of these topics, but we're definitely going to have you back on again. I understand you have a new book in the works for the end of the year?
I do. It's called Jesus in the Near-Death Experience. And Jesus is the most seen individual during near-death experiences. Not everybody knows that.
Wow.
And so what is Jesus saying now versus what he said 2,000 years ago? And
Fascinating.
So what is Jesus saying to a new generation for today's world?
And please tell our listeners one more time how they can get your book and find out more about you.
Yes. So my current book out is Psychology and the Near-Death Experience. And it is it's a spiritual book that has psychology elements in it, but it's primarily a spiritual book. And it's in-depth study of near-death experiences. So people who really want to get into the meat of the issue, like we did today during the interview, I think would enjoy it. You can find it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, Apple iTunes. And, of course, you can go to my website, which is www.neardeathexppsy.com. That's neardeathexppsy.com.
Roy, thank you, and thank you for bringing us this amazing message, this really hopeful and wonderful message. And I hope each of our listeners reads your book and finds out more about this and also looks within themselves to find the answers that we're all searching for in this world today.
Thank you, Victor. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today.
Roy, thank you, and thank you all for joining us tonight on Destination Unlimited. I am Victor the Voice Furman. We'll be back next week. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.